Resuming debate, the honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Our debate today is happening because the executive branch of government has defied the will of Parliament. Members in this place some months ago passed a motion to compel the government to release documents related to a $400 million or so worth of funds that were misappropriated. It's entirely within Parliament's purview to ask for documents, particularly since they are documents produced by the government and are related to public expenditures. Parliament asked for these documents so that we, as members, could do our primary job, the actual reason why Canadians pay our salaries, which is to hold the government to account. Let me remind all colleagues here, your first and primary role as a member of Parliament is to hold the executive branch of government to account. So in this instance, on what we're debating today, it boggles the mind that there are members willing to work with the government to help them defy the will of Parliament and to prevent parliamentarians from doing their job. It boggles the mind that there are members of the governing party who don't understand that it's not just the privileges of opposition members who have been broached in this case and continue to be broached, but it's also the privileges of members of the governing party's caucus. How a member arrives at the state, the willingness to cede the power their constituents gave them to the centre of their party for less than nothing is actually easy to understand, but it's hard for someone to see in the moment. So allow me to elaborate for all colleagues here and for colleagues who may follow us in these seats in the future, what this means and why it's important to the debate at hand today. Lev Grossman's masterwork, the Magician Trilogy, an exploration of self and identity, ends with the statement, "Fillory is who I used to be, but I'm somebody different now." This passage, profound after reading the entirety of the text, refers to the protagonist who had structured his identity around reaching a mythical location. He reaches his goal, but the journey and what happens after changes that sense of self, as does it change his sense of what power should be used for. Many of us here have traveled a similar road. It's easy for in our quest to earn a seat in this place and to keep it, for it to be our identity. And then, for the very few of us who are fortunate to be selected to sit here, we are presented with yet another identity-shaping set of dangling carrots. You want a cabinet position, right? Or what about that parliamentary secretary position? Or what about that vice chair of a committee? There is inherent oil and water-like tension between these two potential identities because in the former, in our first past the post system, power is derived by the people who voted for us to sit in this place. In the latter, power is given by the center of our parties. The former is the only true power in politics. It is the base of power from which the centers of our parties derive theirs, and it can be only rescinded by our constituents at an election. The latter power, that from the center of our parties, is illusory. It is derived from a critical mass of members who vote together and form the ability to give out positions and salary increases. It is bestowed at the pleasure of one man, there haven't been many women yet, and can be rescinded at his pleasure. The most impactful members of Parliament understand the dual nature of power in this place and how to keep that duality in balance. In our partisan system, it is good and necessary to support the center of the party to which one was elected, to lean into the ability to accomplish things like passing a budget as a team. But if one constantly spends one's time chasing the carrots dangled by the center of one's party, when the needs of one's constituents aren't being served, disaster for a member, their constituents, and for their political party inevitably ensues. This is a law of power. So how does a member of Parliament put this duality into balance and keep it there? First and foremost, we need a constant connection to our constituents. This means asking our constituents constantly what is important to them and what their opinions are. And with that information, we're then able to help the centers of our parties form partisan positions that benefit our communities through policy making and constructive criticism. The most successful centers of political parties not only relish accepting this feedback, but expect it from their members. And that's because our communities are constantly changing. They're not homogeneous. They're not static. And we cannot develop public policy that ignores their needs and will. To do this, a member needs a strong grounding outside of their political identity so that we can have the courage when the need arises and so that we can see a future for ourselves that doesn't involve being a member of Parliament. This grounding can also be our families, our hobbies, or our spiritual practices, or in the best cases, a combination of all three. Without that type of external grounding, it's virtually impossible to discern what our constituent needs are when pressed upon by the media, by lobbyists and special interest groups, by our own egos, and yes, by the center of our parties. Crucially, a member needs to understand the procedural rules of this place, inside and out, and have a capacity and willingness to use those rules. Members who don't take the time to understand what their privileges are here as members or how the standing order works are like a carpenter without tools. When all these actions work together, the duality of power is balanced, good public policy is made, and successful political careers are established. But it's also deadly easy to knock this duality out of balance. This happens when a member stops listening to their constituents, starts chasing promotions, cedes their power their constituents gave them to a center of power who has forgotten that their power, without the support of the people, is an illusion. And so here we are today. Members of the governing party have ceded so much of their constituents' power to the center of their party that ministers in the government feel no compunction at all, about letting a $400 million spending scandal happen because they know that their partisan colleagues won't force them or the will of Parliament to come clean. The leader of the governing party allows his ministers to do this because he, in turn, knows he won't face any criticisms from his members either. Right. And members are allowing this to happen for fear of losing their greenlit candidate status or clinging to hope that they're going to get a car and driver and a cabinet post. And that lack of balance is why we're here today, in this place, with a Parliament paralyzed by a government made unwilling to accept the rule of Parliament due to the misaligned priorities of the governing party's members of Parliament. And it's a shame to see colleagues, many of whom I respect in this place, willingly cede their power given what's possible for any of us and the people we represent when we lean into it instead. Being a Canadian member of Parliament means that literally anyone in the world will take your call. Any policy change we elect to spend our attention on is possible to enact without limit. We in this place can't only change our community, but the country and the world. So what we do with that power actually matters. It must be used responsibly and with great conscience, wielded with impeccable judgment, free of ego, and grounded in upholding the rule of law, democracy, Canadian pluralism, and freedom. If I could go back in time and tell myself these truths when I was first elected, I would. It would have saved me a lot of time and a lot of heartache. The only time I've failed in my role here has been when I've ignored those truths. Thankfully, those moments have been few and far between in the years that I've served here. And when they've happened, I've been able to recognize and admit fault and move on. But when I've embraced those same truths, magic has happened. These same things are possible for anybody in this place. I'm proud of the cross-partisan effort with my former colleague and deputy leader of the NDP, Megan Leslie, which resulted in the creation of Sable Island National Park and a national ban on plastic microbeads. I'm proud of creating a program that led to the creation of countless high-tech businesses which are thriving in our country today. I'm proud to have stood with delegates at our party convention so many years ago now to change the definition of marriage in our party's policy declaration. I'm proud of, after months of blood, sweat, and tears, to have forced the current government to recognize the Yazidi genocide and to have forced them to create a program that saw around 1,500 of the world's most vulnerable people take refuge in our borders. And I'm proud to have, amongst much consternation, authored the Buffalo Declaration. It was a spicy piece of business, which in many ways spurred a year-long debate over how to champion Western Canada's rights and standing in Canada. I'm proud to have brought, written, and passed a motion for this place to condemn the anti-Semitic boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. I'm proud to have fought for changes to elect more women to this place, see them elected, and make it easier for them to work here. I'm proud to have uncovered and prosecuted multiple government spending scandals. I'm proud to have enforced against an overwhelming amount of political pressure, the federal government into closing the loophole in the Safe Third Country Agreement, under which they allowed tens of thousands of people who had reached the safety of upstate New York to illegally enter our country. I'm proud to have fought and won through endless political pressure and national pressure against the government's senseless and useless quarantine hotel system, which brought needless mental and financial anguish to countless Canadians during the pandemic. I was the first Conservative critic to call for major changes to Canada's telecommunications oligopoly and faced an incredible amount of pushback from the oligopoly for doing so. I was the first parliamentarian to call for a regulatory framework for cryptocurrency and tabled a bill to do the same. I was the first legislature in any jurisdiction around the world to raise the issue of large language models in any legislature, founded the multi-partisan parliamentary caucus on emerging technology, and passed, after a year of work, a resolution supported by over 100 countries on the impact of AI and human rights at the Interparliamentary Union in Geneva last week, and a shout out to my colleague Nima Lujanjira from Tanzania from her work on the same. At the Interparliamentary Union, I've now thrice chaired the General Assembly Drafting Committee and emerged with consensus-adopted resolutions condemning Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, with Russians sitting at the table. And just last week, I passed a resolution calling for reform to multilateral institutions to ensure their long-term viability and to be able to solve global crises and promote peace. I've proudly stood with Canada's allied nations against much public pressure to do the opposite in their fight to protect themselves from terrorism and destruction. I've also, in changing times for the media, managed to build a communication platform that allows me to reach 1 million people every day, no less than 1 million people every day. I no longer have to rely on the stilted lens of partisan columnists or political talk show hosts to communicate an idea to the public. I can do that on my own. Accomplishing these things have meant ruffling feathers, sometimes within the public, within opposing parties, and sometimes even within my own caucus. Now, colleagues, conflict is not something that we should strive for here. We should strive for peace. But speaking truth to power is not conflict. Rather, it's the essence of our existence as parliamentarians. I raise my accomplishments in this place not to boast, colleagues, but to inspire. Even if colleagues here might not agree with the change that I've enacted. But the reality is, I've now sat in every position in this House, on both sides of the aisle. I've sat as a cabinet minister in the front bench and at the very back corner of this place with my back touching the curtains. It was in that last seating position that I had dinner with a woman who I very much respect, the Honourable Jody Wilson-Raybould, who reminded me that I was now sitting in a seat that she once occupied. She reminded me that what she was able to accomplish from that position and where her power came from, and she expected no less from me. This hard lesson was a gift, a dose of humility that I pray everyone in this place gets to experience at some point in their career and come through with grace. I'm deeply blessed to have had the counsel of Jody and other principled leaders like her. Their actions are reminders to me that no matter where a parliamentarian sits in this House, our power remains the same. I know that my ability to effect change remains limited only by my smarts, my courage, my grace, my knowledge of the rule, and my willingness to pay a cost for what is doing right when right is needed to be done. But that's the rub of this place, isn't it, Mr. Speaker? The cost of doing what's right. In moments where we, as leaders, can feel in our deepest gut that change is needed, or an admission of wrongdoing is needed, or we are asked to do something that in our hearts we know we shouldn't be doing, or if we toy with relinquishing jealousies and grudges in favor of peace, but we feel like we shouldn't be doing that. We often think about what would be lost if we carry through with our actions. Will it cost us our pride? How about a shot at a cabinet spot? Will it mean sitting at the back of the House? Will it mean we don't get to run again? But in those moments, colleagues, I challenge you instead to think about what you will gain if you do the right thing. The ability to effect positive change for our communities, a change in perspective, results, and respect. And so, colleagues, so we are here today. I understand why the government is asking members of its caucus to support it in defying the will of Parliament. The release of these documents will no doubt expose wrongdoing on the part of the government. But how are we as parliamentarians of any political stripe to force the government to admit wrongdoing and enact change if we can't exercise our fundamental rights and privileges as parliamentarians? Similarly, members of the government should want the will of Parliament to be upheld in this case as well. Ministers should not be allowed to act with compunction in these matters. We have a fiduciary responsibility to our constituents to ensure that taxpayer dollars are not wasted, that they're not used to enrich people because of their proximity to the government, as opposed to their place in an impartial and unbiased procurement system set under parliamentary supply rules. Bureaucrats within ministries will also act with compunction if they feel like Parliament's will can be ignored. We've all seen this in committees where members of departments will sit there and just look at us like we're ghosts, like we don't matter. I reject that notion. I represent 120,000 Canadians. I stand here in the full apex of the power that they have bestowed upon me, and I will not cede that power. I will not let these people be held to account. I will not let people get rich off the backs of my constituents. And I will hold the government to account. And it matters not what the topic is. Colleagues have said, would we be doing this if this was an oil and gas company? Absolutely we would. And would I be doing this if it was my political party? I absolutely would too. Because there are things that matter more than the center of our power, or our parties. The things that matter are the rules that uphold this place. And that's why the government must immediately accept the will of Parliament to release these documents and allow themselves to be held to account. It's also why the members of the caucus of the governing party should be pushing their visionless, listless, embattled, and spent leader to do the right thing by refusing to participate in the government's blockade of Parliament's will. I'm deeply grateful to be surrounded by people who not only expect me to do the right thing, but stand beside me, come hell or high water, while I do so. To Sean Schnell, Carrie and Paul Frank, Dustin and the crew, Denise, Petronella, Cole, Murdoch, Eric and Sonia, my sister and my husband and children, there is not a day that goes by where I have not been grateful for your expectation of excellence and morality, and for your support in doing the same. It has been your support, the support of countless others in Calgary, Nose Hill, and across the country that makes me believe that no matter how broken our country is now, better is possible in the future. Our country is worth fighting for. I will not write it off, and our problems can be fixed. And I'm proud to fight for change alongside my colleagues in the Conservative Party. Our team has gone through a lot in the last several years, but standing here today, after going through that visceral time of turbulence in which we decided where we were going to set our priorities, we are now in a caucus that is filled with peace and is clearly united and focused on enacting practical, common sense change to fix our country. And that fills me with pride and with hope. I guess the moral of the story, colleagues, is this. If you set foot in this place hoping to be comfortable or hoping to be liked, you will fail in your responsibilities to your constituents, and you will have failed to use the power that they have bestowed upon you to do what is right on their behalf. If you seek to appease people rather than to fight for what is right, you will fail. If you seek to enrich yourself or sate your ego instead of rising up for others, you will fail. And if you seek to destroy and undermine the democratic institutions that undermine the miracle that is Canada's pluralistic democracy, you will also fail. You can also be sure that many others, millions of others who believe in the beauty that is our country and understands that our beauty and the beauty of our country only rests upon the rules of this place being followed, including myself, will fight to ensure that you fail. So colleagues, govern yourselves accordingly. Do what is right, respect the will of Parliament, and release these documents today.